He was a legendary explorer who set out on an expedition to the Himalayas.
Weather's getting bad, we should rope up.
And disappeared for 7 years. Until he found himself in a forbidden world.
His Holiness the Dalai Lama would like to meet you.
That would change him forever.
It is an honor to meet you, Your Holiness.
Yellowhead. Yellowhead.
If you can imagine a hidden place, rich with all the strange beauty of your nighttime dreams, then you know where I am.
Brad Pitt. 7 years in Tibet.
Your Holiness, what is the difference between self-realization and God-realization? Self-realization and God-realization.
I don't know.
Hey guys, welcome to the horrible introduction to Tibetan Buddhism. I think looking at the scenery right now, you know exactly what kind of an introduction to Tibetan Buddhism awaits you. In this video, I will be playing lengthy clips of lamas and Buddhist teachers talking about the subject matter. The reason for that is to validate what I've been saying, so you know that I'm not a complete fraud, but also to let people, lamas themselves, define their own tradition and not just have me talk about it. So with these introduction out of the way, let's get into it.
When great beings meditate in a place, when they spend time in a place, their energy comes into that environment. Their energy lingers there, like a Tibetan expression is like a sweet sandalwood fragrance.
Much like this vape dissipates into the air, so does Great Awakening dissipate your afflictions and stuff like that. And this is what happened to the Buddha, the awakened one. This is the definition of a Buddha, somebody who has awakened, the awakened one. This is what happened to him back in India. And his first teaching after obtaining enlightenment was the Four Noble Truths. So, you know, this is a logical place to start with the Tibetan Buddhism, with the Four Noble Truths. So first is the truth of suffering, life is suffering. The second Noble Truth is the origin of suffering, attachment. The third Noble Truth is that cessation of the suffering is possible, nirvana, cessation. And the fourth Noble Truth is the Eightfold Path, which is the way you get there, the way you get to cessation. So this is right view, right intentions, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right concentration, and right mindfulness. Guess what? I'm not really going to get into these Eightfold Path, because one way to think about them is that this is where the different schools and different traditions of Buddhism begin to arch into their own way. They start to have certain priorities and certain parts of the teachings that they stress, and certain scriptures, the Sanskrit scriptures, that some recognize and others don't. So I will elaborate on this later, but I'm just not gonna get into it. I'm gonna really focus on the first three. noble truths. So the first noble truth is usually translated as life is suffering, which is not exactly right. Of course, how much are you suffering right now, my friend? Not so much, because you just started this video and shortly you're going to disconnect from it. So the suffering isn't so great, but a certain dissatisfaction is building up in you. Why am I watching this, and where is this going? Dissatisfaction is actually closer to what is meant rather than suffering. Now, suffering is a category of dissatisfaction. Like, if somebody just called you a piece of shit when you were tender and vulnerable, you would experience suffering, but you wouldn't say that you're satisfied, because suffering is a subcategory of dissatisfaction. However, what is meant here by suffering is this inability to get satisfaction. Like, when did you have a day when you were totally satisfied throughout the duration of the whole day? Now, some days might be more satisfactory than others. Like, maybe you were able to connect with a young honey in an intimate way, either through the spirit or physical contact. This would be a satisfactory day, but throughout that day there were moments of uncertainty and anticipation and whatever it is else, doubt, and a sense of some kind of anticipation that was not pleasant. Now, of course, in the end, like, you recall this as a satisfactory day, but you would be a fucking liar to say that, you know, like, the whole day would be filled with satisfaction. That would make no sense. That would make you a liar. A lot of the time we kind of fidget in life. We readjust the air conditioner in our car. We change the station. We feel angry with the drivers. We want the kid. And then when the kid comes, he makes so much noise. And then you have to pay things and for them, because this is what children require, money. And then, like, maybe your partner physically changes, and now you feel like a bad person for finding these changes to be important to you. And now all of a sudden there's a girl at work, and you're 45 years old and she's 21, and you fixate on her and believe that she's going to offer you some sort of spiritual salvation, even though you know that it's just a matter of physical attraction. But now you're in the tangle of this whole thing, and then you go back home and you kind of hated traffic before, but now you kind of want the traffic because you don't want to get home, and you readjust the air conditioner and you change the radio station and you go for an oil change even though it's not yet time, just because you don't want to get home to the screaming child and the wife who loves you, but you don't feel it anymore. You look at her eyes and it's even more painful than if you were actually fighting, because you know there is no synchronicity. Something has shifted. Something has changed. It's attachment. It's attachment, which is the origin of dissatisfaction.
And so because of that, the second noble truth is the truth of the origin of suffering. And so this is the cause of suffering. So the first noble truth, the truth of suffering, is the result. And the second noble truth teaches the cause of that suffering. So normally, we are able to make some choices when it comes to the result, which is suffering. We are able to discriminate and make some choices, but it's more difficult for us to make the choices about the causes of this. We don't understand about this. And so for that reason, it is often said to be more difficult to actually deal with the causes and to deal with the proper ways to behave, what we should do and what we should avoid, than it is to deal with the results. And so for that reason, the truth of the origin is extremely important.
I want to say a few things here, my friends. All of these translations are not exact. When I introduced the first noble truth as life is suffering, the only reason I did so is because this is the standard way that it has been translated into English. However, I myself don't think about it this way. I think of it as dissatisfaction. In the similar vein, when I say awareness in this video, I'm actually talking about the mind. I believe that the English word mind doesn't perfectly capture what Buddhists say, what the Buddhist actually the underlying term is, or the underlying understanding for mind. So instead of it, I'm going to use the word awareness. And attachment is another one of these. That the origin of suffering is attachment. The word attachment is just kind of too broad, and it's not really specific enough. What the Buddhists are actually talking about is clinging, or the act of grasping. Because there are always these kind of douchebags who say, oh, you know, attachment is bad, then how come you're practicing Buddhism? Aren't you attached to the path? My dude, no. Of course you're attached to the path. Buddhism is not against goal-oriented behavior. It just points out that a specific mechanism of awareness, a specific psychological mechanisms, generates dissatisfaction and also suffering. So it is about a specific precise mechanism. It's not about all possible human behavior, all possible goal-oriented behavior. Now that would be ridiculous, and it would be false. It would be as ridiculous as literally believing that every moment of your life is suffering. That simply isn't the case. That simply isn't the case. So if my introduction of the First Noble Truth wasn't oversexed enough, how about illustrating what Buddhists mean by attachment through this, a very crude joke? I don't actually expect you to find this joke funny, as I don't expect you to actually finish this video. But it does have an illustrative capacity, okay? So here's the joke, okay? Alright. Alright, so a ship has crashed or something, and a man ended up on an island alone. He's alone on the island, but there are two animals with him. One is a dog, and the other one is a goat. Or maybe a sheep. Okay, so there's a man and there are two of these animals. Now, over time, this man really developed a kind of a fancy for the sheep, and he tried to approach it with ill intent. But whenever he did so, the dog started barking. And so he was always disrupted because the dog started barking, okay? Kind of like that. And so one day, a beautiful lady, like another ship has crashed, and a beautiful lady appears on the island. And so the man, the man says, "I'm so happy to see you. I'm so happy to see you. Can you please watch the dog?" So yeah, this kind of a narrow-minded preoccupation. So here's the sort of the point, the Buddhist idea, right, is that all my suffering and pleasures I have ever experienced in my stupid life have all been registered in my awareness. They, by definition, would need to be, right? Again, for some reason I keep coming up with this, but I guess romantic involvement is one of the most significant kind of ways of attachment. But if a very pretty girl whispered to herself, "I love Ivan," right? Because it didn't register in my awareness. I didn't experience anything. Everything has to go through that. Everything has to go through awareness. And since it is awareness that registers happiness and misery, doesn't it make sense to primarily work with your awareness in order to achieve happiness, as opposed to working with the external world? So if I project my happiness on a specific object, I then, through this attachment, through this clinging to this object, to the idea of it, I invested with magical powers. And when I obtain that object, I feel a satisfaction that is actually a product of my mind and not actually intrinsic to the nature of this object. However, in the process of doing that, I have developed a reflex, a habitual pattern that all of us have until the Great Awakening, of associating greatness, pleasure, and fulfillment and the promise of contentment with external objects, even if it is the mind that ultimately perceives and experiences happiness in relation to this object. So of course, naturally, when I obtain the object, since this object itself has no magical power to make me happy, since only my mind invested it with this power, naturally a new period of clinging begins to another object that I then start to idealize and hold on to and cherish, even though, again, the whole thing is an illusion. It's only my mind that actually registers these things as happiness or unhappiness. And so for as long as we're engaged in this sort of a thing, by definition, we can never be content because we're deluded. We're not focusing on the actual reality. And so the ultimate culprit here is actually not attachment, even not clinging to an object, not a narrow definition of happiness. The actual culprit is ignorance, the inability to perceive cause and effect, or not perceiving cause and effect, looking for happiness in the wrong places, of which clinging and attachment is just ultimately the biggest and the most detrimental symptom.
Buddhist school of thought, you see, emphasis, very extremely important, the Brahman. Whether, you see, our understand the thing correct or realistic or not, you see, we have to examine our view. The only
something which is established by valid cognition is considered to be existent, and something which is not established by valid cognition is considered non-existent.
So here the message look and touch.
So whether or not a thing exists is defined primarily by a mental perception.
다지네 시변을 로치지로 인다 로야타고 인사디 로티치도 샤워를 저는 내면 상상으로.
So whether or not whether or not perception or a cognition is distorted depends on whether the object actually exists the way the mind apprehends it.
So that's Buddhist psychology. In that field, no concept of right or wrong, or good or bad. Simply reality. No sentient being wants suffering. Any sentient being always desire to overcome suffering. Yet, many suffering ultimately is own creation. That's obviously ignorance. Nobody consciously making effort to create more suffering. No. Since the source of causes of suffering due to ignorance, therefore it is very important to bring knowledge. The counterforce of ignorance is knowledge or wisdom. The ignorance will not go away through prayer, through just simple meditation. The counterforce of ignorance is only awareness or education and wisdom, like that.
Now, Buddhism identifies 4 types of suffering that I will explain to you in a moment. The 4 classifications are: number 1, the suffering of suffering; number 2, the suffering of impermanence; number 3, the suffering, you could say, of existence, or the all-pervasive suffering. That's number 3. And then the 4th classification is looking at your mom's face. That's one of the greatest sufferings there. Okay, well, maybe there are just 3. So the suffering of suffering is a suffering that is unpleasant at the beginning, unpleasant in the middle, and unpleasant at the end, and you're happy when it's over. This is just the obvious suffering, which kind of brings me back to your mom's face. No, but it's like, it's sickness, being punched in the face, like just the obvious suffering. That's the first category. The suffering of impermanence is pleasant at the beginning, pleasant in the middle, and then painful at the end. I mean, it's just basically, I don't know, having a nice glass that you really attach to and then it breaks. You liked it for a while, but then it had, of course, the nature of impermanence. Of course it did. And then it broke, and now you're very, sour about it. You're not really happy about it. This really doesn't refer to your mom's face because it, of course, is unpleasant at the beginning, etc. Okay. And then the all-pervasive suffering, or you could even call it like existential suffering if you really want to stretch it out into modernity. It's kind of difficult to define, and I urge you to look this up right now if you want to. In any case, but the way I would almost define it for myself, it's almost like feeling the nostalgia for something as you're experiencing it. It's like, you're stroking the girl's hair or something. You kind of know that it's going to end one way or another. She's going to find out about your 3 kids in the Philippines, or she's going to leave you for somebody with a better wrist size, with a better social status, or you're just both going to die. Inevitably, you're going to die. So even though the suffering hasn't happened yet, you should be enjoying this. You have an understanding that based on these current functionings, based on the reality of life, let's say, you know that it's just going to go to the toilet eventually and you're going to be crushed inside. So that is the all-pervasive suffering. I mean, not everybody, I guess, feels it, even though it could be maybe a title of my autobiography.
And I find it kind of funny, I find it kind of sad.
Let's see, 2 more questions before we open up. So there are 3 things I admire about you. I mean, more than 3, but there are 3 big ones. I admire your progressiveness, your open mind. Yes. I admire your work towards women's rights. And the 3rd thing I admire about you is environmentalism. Yes. You are known to be a very avid environmentalist. So the question here is, my friend, Your Holiness.
Yes, no problem.
What is your vision for the environment?
Sometimes I call myself your loneliness.
Yes. In front of camera, I must call you Your Holiness.
Oh, yeah.
That's right.
That's okay. We have plenty of time.
Now, I don't feel like I need to say too much about the 3 types of suffering. The main point is that of all the different types of suffering that we do not want, some we are able to recognize and some we are not able to recognize. And so the main point comes down to this. And so because we do not recognize some of them as being suffering, then it is difficult for us to develop any wish to be freed from them or to even do anything to free ourselves from them. Another difficulty that we also encounter is that there are some types of suffering that we also fixate on or cling to as being pleasurable. With the suffering of suffering, not just humans, but all sentient beings are able to see and understand that that is suffering. With the suffering of change, sometimes I think in developed countries, in developed cities, we can see that there's all the pleasures, there's all the luxury, and we start to get bored with it. It starts to get difficult. We start to feel a bit of ennui with it. And so we then feel like we'd rather just be in a kind of neutral state, a neutral feeling, a neutral kind of bored state. This does happen. And I think in particular that it happens among Dharma practitioners who get bored with the pleasures and luxury and then wish to be freed of that and would rather stay in a rather neutral state. And so there are many people who are like this, but that neutral state or that neutral sensation itself does not transcend the nature of suffering. And so for that reason, when we talk about suffering, then wanting to avoid suffering or free ourselves from suffering, then the motivation to free ourselves from the first two types of suffering is not presented traditionally as the primary motivation for practicing the Dharma. Instead, what is the primary motivation for developing a wish for liberation is the wish to be free of the third type of suffering, the suffering of formation. And so this is the primary motivation that we should have.
So as you see here, the Four Noble Truths point us out to the fact that our foundation isn't real. Like the foundation, our grasping for something, there's nothing there, and we will perpetually get, to use a crude expression, get kicked in the balls by our own mind, because we're training our own mind with a continuum of clinging. We go through these delusions, we go through these cycles of pleasure and pain again and again and again. And all this cyclical existence is called samsara. Now this thing is actually going to go on forever now that I wound it up. It's very kind of grim, this nun. Already somebody died for this. I got it at Goodwill. But this is cyclic existence. You wind it up, and then it's hard to stop. You just continue on with it. Life after life. Meeting your mother and looking at her face also. And losing your mother. And then, you know, sleeping with a girl who was your mother before. But more importantly, it's just unrealistic expectations from your mother. In whatever form she emerges. It's unrealistic. And we keep winding it up. We keep adding fuel to the fire. And so the natural question is Buddhism a pessimistic religion? Well, as you may have noticed, or at least as you should realize eventually, Buddha was not a prophet. Buddha was somebody who looked at the nature of mind, looked at the nature of existence, and then discovered this. So this is not something that, according to Buddhists, Buddha kind of made up. It was always there, this nature of existence. And he just realized what was there. He realized the truth. And he was able to work with it and give us a series of methods to escape it, to escape cyclic existence. So is Buddhism pessimistic? In a sense it is. You can't kind of take that away from it. But it's like, in that Batman movie, it's not the hero you want, it's the hero you deserve. And in this case, it's not the Dharma you want, it's just the Dharma that is. This is what's going on. Now, if you agree with it, then you proceed into Buddhist practice. But it's not something you really have to believe. It was a realized experience, enlightenment, awakening. And then there are the methods and paths available to you to get to the point of awakening. So that is the essence of Buddhism.
Things do not have inherent existence, but you perceive things as having inherent existence, and because of this grasping, there's a risk of losing things. You develop fear. 4 misconceptions, as we say. So it is because of this, your wrong ways of looking at things, that you develop fear. But if you are able to see things like a dream, there's nothing to lose, nothing much to gain. So there will be no fear. When you dreamt that you won $1 million, but when you wake up, not even a single dollar was there, but still you have no sadness because you know this is a dream. Similarly, the whole waking life, if you are able to understand is a dream, there will be not much agitation, less grasping, you see. So that's what he's saying. Many of you might have read this beautiful text called 37 Bodhisattva Practices. In that there is a line which says, Tuna Dembara Sungwe Atangche. Athangche means you get extremely tired, exhausted, because you misperceive what is wrong as true. Tuve nangoti dembare samne. Just like trying to catch the rainbow. At a distance it looks very beautiful, but if you try to catch it, go near and catch it, you will never be able to catch it. It's like that. Things we are experiencing is like that. But there's an old Tibetan saying which says, if you want to catch rainbow, then you need to ride on a white goat and put some dog shit in your mouth. I mean, this is just an ordinary saying, you know. But the reality is you're not going to, catch the rainbow, you see.
Our concept of human nature is certainly limited, partial, socially conditioned, constrained by our own character defects and the defects and the limitations of the intellectual culture in which we exist.
However, it's also wrong to purely view Buddhism as a pessimistic religion, because Buddhism, of course, believes that you can see the world as it really is, that you can, in fact, be free of suffering. So these are grandiose claims. And in fact, if you look carefully, that Buddhism associates truth with happiness. They're perfectly aligned. So a kind of an idea for many of us, it's like there are certain truths we rather not know, like what our coworkers maybe think of us, or maybe even our parents. Like, we don't really want to know. But what Buddhism is aiming for is pure perception, pure awareness, not just conceptual understanding, but an actual, in a sense, training, or the realization of the full potential of your mind through training, in order to see reality as it actually is. However, yes, there is an aspect of negation and rejection of pursuing happiness in the external world. There is that aspect of renunciation. After all, the Buddha founded a monastic order. So that just can't be edited out of there, that kind of a level of Buddhist pessimism in a sense. That cannot be edited out of there. So when the Buddha was asked to summarize his teachings, he said, do good when you can, help others. Number 2, don't harm others if you are unable to help them. At the very least, don't harm them. And then the third one was purify the mind. Those are, of course, interconnected. You cannot purify the mind as you are training aggression and developing the reflex and the habit of aggression within yourself. So what Buddhism ultimately is, like people say, is it a religion? Is it a philosophy? Is it a way of life? It's actually, purely speaking, none of these. It is when you accept the premises of the Dharma, if you recognize in them a component of reality, and then you work with your awareness, work with your mind, to actually see that reality, to actually experience awakening.
Of course, I'm a student of Nalanda Master, and of course, Buddhist monk. So my mind may be a little biased. So please, you check me. I consider Buddha one ancient Indian scientist, because Buddha stated, "Oh, my follower, monks, scholars, should not accept my teaching out of faith, out of devotion, but rather thorough investigation and experiment." So from that aspect, I consider Buddha was scientific thinking. And then, quite clear, like Nagarjuna, they rejected some of Buddha's own word. If you accept this Buddha's word, it goes against reason. Therefore, we should take importance of reason rather than faith. So therefore, you see, we have already now over 30 years, now nearly 40 years, discuss with modern scientists. At the beginning, when I expressed my desire, discuss with the scientists, then some Buddhists, mainly from West, you see, when I asked that, you see, they told me, "Oh, be careful. Science is killer of religion." Then I reflect this Buddha's own word. Reason, experiment is more important than faith.
So the faith that you have as a Buddhist is not in the Buddha as a prophet or as a divine being, but actually the faith you have in the capacity of your mind and the ability of the Dharma, the teachings, to guide your mind to its ultimate capacity. Buddhists have a profound belief in the mind, in awareness, that is ultimately has the potential for complete purity. In Mahayana Buddhism, in Tibetan Buddhism, there is a belief in Buddha nature that literally every being has.
Today, Buddha Shakyamuni is our teacher, is Buddha, we ordinary sentient being. But we have the potential. Therefore, realize that potential, make effort. What Buddha Shakyamuni done. So we follow similar way, then eventually we also the same level of Buddha Shakyamuni. Then no longer prostration towards Buddha Shakyamuni, because same level. Perhaps I think this kind of the concept gives us some kind of enthusiasm, isn't it? I think for me, of course, I respect also the old teachings, theistic teachings, God, very good, these things, as I mentioned this, today as well as yesterday. But you see, that sometimes you give God always there, we simply here. The Bodhisattva tells, we also eventually become God, become Buddha.
And so the refuge prayer that you read is, until I become enlightened, I go for refuge, meaning I take direction from the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Sangha is the community of monastics, a community of practitioners. Through the practice of generosity and other perfections, may I become a Buddha for the benefit of all beings. May I achieve awakening.
You want to become a Buddha. The Buddha is the fruition. But in Vajrayana practice, what we special emphasize is, you are Buddha right now and right here. So not like Buddha is somewhere in the future, you are now no good, not bad, no good, bad, and slowly you become better, and in the future you become Buddha. It's not like that. But Buddha is within you right now, right here. We have diamond-like Buddha nature within us. So pointing out, teaching is to point out your true nature, nature of mind practice.
So everything which comes into our mind, if we recognize it in the moment that it arises, if we accept it, we can then just let it go. We don't have to hold on to it. We don't have to give it energy. We don't have to be swept away. We are on the riverbank looking at the river flowing. We are not right in the middle of the river being swept along. We can all do this. The nature of the mind is naturally knowing. Without that, we would be dead. So all we have to do is go back to what we really are and stop identifying with the wrong thing. There was a very great Thai forest master called Ajahn Chah. And recently I was reading his biography. And in that, when he was in the forest training under several masters, at some point he came to exactly this. He puts it very succinctly, but that the mind basically is that which is known and that which knows. And the whole point is simply to dwell with that which knows. Start identifying with that which knows and stop identifying with the known. That's all. It's so easy. Really, I mean, 98% of your problems are solved, if not 100, just by doing that. But we don't do it. It's interesting that we don't do it. When one is in the presence of a very great Lama with whom there is a deep karmic connection, it can happen that if one's own mind is very open and receptive, completely without expectations, but very open, he can give what is called, in Tibetan it's called ngotro. It means like pointing out, introducing you. And he can introduce you to the nature of the mind. He doesn't give you anything. You already have it. And it's a very simple experience. It's nothing, it's not, you know, rainbow lights and trumpets. It's very simple, but in that moment, just for a moment, everything falls apart. And there is just that moment of total naked awareness. It's extremely simple. It's so simple that you can miss it very easily because we always expect that somehow it's going to be some really great experience, something really... And normally it's so plain, so bare. That almost people might think that can't be it. And so you're looking out there in the future for some incredible thing to happen. And all the time, actually, moment to moment, it's already happening. But we don't recognize it. You see, every time you hear a sound, everything you see, you can only see, you can only recognize a sound because of awareness. If we had no awareness, we would be like a corpse. But we don't recognize that awareness because we're so fascinated by our senses. Do you understand? Because we're so captivated by this panorama outside and all the panorama inside, all our thoughts and memories and daydreams and hopes and dreams, we miss the fact that behind all that is the knowing of it.
So ultimately, the idea is that as you start to practice the teachings, as you see the truth of them, this gives you faith in the capacity of your mind and in the truth of the teachings. And then through various methods, including a connection with the teacher, you will then become a Buddha in Mahayana. In Theravadan countries, you will become an arahat, somebody who achieved cessation but is not a Buddha.
Now, where did you get these little tiaras from?
I just have a bunch of them. I have a collection.
Those jewels aren't from the dwarf's diamond mine, are they?
I don't think so.
My friends, let's say you have memories from your childhood, right? And you remember the ho 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 of Santa Claus coming to town. Like, you just remember that excitement and seeing the old man himself from the North Pole. The monotony of your life has been broken by the presence of the actual Santa Claus in your house, giving you Legos or different candies, things of this nature. That's amazing. That's like super cool. That's super cool. Let's say later on you found out that the Santa Claus was your uncle. You heard him laughing at a bar or something, or maybe even, laughing at a bar. That would be pretty later on in your life to realize that. The essence of that experience has changed. In a sense, that experience, you could say that essence became empty, right? It became empty of inherent existence. That which you thought was inherent to it, the reality of Santa Claus, was in fact not there. The whole thing was a sort of a compassionate weave of a lie or something, that your whole experience. But that doesn't mean that it didn't happen, that nothing happened, that you didn't receive the gifts. And then let's say later on you found out that your uncle was locked up on charges of abusing a child, that he's a pedophile. Imagine that. Now there is another layer to that experience. Now that experience that at first was just a normal childhood disappointment now has become something profoundly creepy. How long did you sit on Santa's lap back in the day? For how long did that exactly last? So it's the same experience. It's just its essence that you thought was there isn't there. It's not like you didn't receive the gifts. It's not like your happiness at that moment wasn't real. It's not as if nothing happened and you just live in a state of fucking nothingness. No, it's just that it didn't have that essence.
So it is considered one of the defeats to teach emptiness to an unsuitable vessel or recipient.
I think one lady, here, yesterday expressed to me, a little sort of frightened, isn't it? You. Many years ago, almost 15, 20 years ago, one Bihari teacher, very educated person, he eventually developed his interest about Buddhism and ordained, actually from me. Then one day he told me he feels very difficult, the concept of anathema theory. So when he think about that, he actually shivering.
Shivering.
Shivering. He feels very uncomfortable. Then I told emptiness or anathema, particularly the emptiness, means this is something like one side of the coin. One side is empty. Absence of independence, absence of independent existence. Because absence of independent existence create the possibility of interdependency. If things exist independently, no other cause effect. So the very sort of nature of absence of independence, it sort of create a possibility of influence or impact from other sort of other factors. Then again, due to obviously other factors is there, so obviously no longer independent existence. So these two things are, you see, one coin's two faces. I told that monk, Bihari monk, then he, little sort of more comfortable. Even during Nagarjuna, even Buddha's own time, Buddha state, substituted as a dimache, digital church coin, Suratenja, call Minive, Mimin Nas, never chance.
So Buddha himself said, I have found teaching which is so precise, which is free of elaboration, and which is in the nature of clear light and non-composite. But whoever to whom I try to teach this is unable to understand it properly. So therefore, I will just shun away from the rest and abide in the forest by myself.
All right, guys, well, here it comes straight into your mouth from the heart of Indian wisdom, from the Vulture's Peak, where the Bodhisattvas had a philosophical discourse. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Yes, it's emptiness, the foundation of Mahayana philosophy, the foundation of Mahayana Buddhism. So here I have my vaping device. What is it? What is it at its core? Well, so fundamentally, it is an arrangement of parts put together through a human will. This device is called Captain PD270. Now, if you were to ask me with a gun to my head, what was the name of this specific mod, I wouldn't be able to tell you before I just read it, even though I had it now for over a year. And even now that I've read it, I've just grown more depressed. Now there's even more reasons to not live, now that I know that it's called Captain PD270. So would it be correct to designate it as a vaping device? And that's it, without referencing its name. Do you need to know the name of this device in order to know its essence? Because, of course, without this designation of a name that could elude us, it wouldn't have been created. That creation had to be called something somewhere for people to work on its design and to distinguish it from other creations. Yet, of course, if this name was erased somehow, I would never give a shit about it. And I would know it, so would I lose part of the essence? If its functionality is impaired, does it stop being real? So, for example, here in the juice compartment, right, there is this thing with nicotine in it. This whole industry is created around having a little nicotine in it, different doses. Now, if this nicotine wasn't there, if people couldn't liquefy nicotine, then this whole industry wouldn't exist, chances are. I mean, people could vape juices without nicotine, but who would want to do that? Very few people. Like, there wouldn't be this huge industry around it if there wasn't an addictive chemical in there. Could you say this thing in and of itself is nicotine? So we're getting somewhere. Exists in a constant state of interdependence. The physical object itself is being destroyed every time I press the button and inhale this dumb vape. Every moment it's being destroyed. It has the nature of impermanence like everything else. However, looking at it, you know, there is a sense that it is eternal or something. I mean, the screen is a little damaged, but I don't perceive it as being in a state of material flux, in a state of disintegration. If I take out a component part and it no longer works, of course it still exists as a physical object. I would still have to designate it by something, by its form or function. If I say this is a broken vaping device. But of course, if I designate it by this function, I can no longer call it a vaping device if it is intrinsically a vaping device. Let's say you gave this device to some old woman, just some elderly woman who just might not even own a television and just kind of living off the last days of her life praying to the Virgin Mary icon in the corner of her house. And this vaping device, somehow she came a hold of it, right? So then she wouldn't know it's a vaping device. She wouldn't understand what is the purpose of this thing at all. So then, therefore, that for this device to be truly real, a person has to have a designation for it. That is to say, it is the mind that makes it real. Therefore, you're saying it has no inherent existence. And yet it would be also stupid to say this is not a vaping device. It would be stupid to say that. So therefore, there is the ultimate truth. It is free of inherent existence like everything else. It literally exists in the context of everything else continuously. It has no other way to exist. Let's take somebody like Adolf Hitler. Well, Adolf Hitler killed a lot of people. And the war that he started killed like 1/5 of my family or more. And yet, of course, if it wasn't for Adolf Hitler, I wouldn't be born. The whole cycle of reproduction would be interrupted and would be different from what it is today. My specific life is entirely connected with my relatives who were killed, other people who were killed, who met who, and who got together with who at what specific time. Without Hitler, I wouldn't be there. Hitler is my daddy, for many of us. No matter how much we dislike the Führer, we're interconnected with him. I was born with asphyxia, or I think that's what it's called. I was blue and I had to be revived by the doctors. I don't know who these doctors' names. They're interconnected with me, but in the matter of my perception, I never think about them. I just exist in a certain vacuum with my thoughts, with everything else. You know, I don't see those causes and conditions. I don't experience them. And so I isolate objects relative to myself as an isolated self. I perceive objects as being solely separate from everything else, and myself as being completely separate from these objects.
And what is this sense of existence? Who is observing the thoughts? And I cannot find. Can you help?
But this is a very important question which you just raised, this question about the observer or about the I. This is also in Buddhism, in Buddhist philosophy, in Buddhist teaching, this is a very important point. The I, what is the I, the self.
Yes.
It's a very fundamental point. In Buddhism, the I, just like everything else, I is a relative phenomenon. There's not an ultimately existing I. There's not an absolutely existing I. There's not an inherently existing I. That's what we think that there is. There is I am here, or intrinsic I. But in reality, that is totally a misconception. It's completely wrong view. There's no such thing as inherent I, because I is a relative. I exists not because we think that my body and feeling, my mind, all these, what we call in Sanskrit skandhas, that means aggregates.
Aggregates,
parts.
yes.
We are made of 5 aggregates, with body, mind, feeling, etc. So we think that I exist in the center of all that, and then leaning to this I, then is my body, my all this as belongings of this I. That's our image.
Yes.
But this is our ignorant image. In the contrary, actually the I exists other way around. It exists totally depend upon the aggregates. Because the aggregate exists, then I exist. I is nothing else than a name that's given on this composition of these aggregates come together, and on this then the name I is given. So therefore I is conventional, we say. Conventional means that it is I as well as the glass, and all these things are conventionally existing or relatively existing, because glass is, there's nothing in it which stands for the glass. It is just the different parts come together, and then conventionally in the world, this is called a glass. This denomination is given, and through this relation of the denomination and the base, there comes an relative glass.
So all objects
are relative.
Yes.
Conventional glass,
Yes.
a relative glass, or interdependent glass, a glass which depends on all its parts. In the same way, me, I, also is a name, it is a convention. In the world, one person is called I, the second person is, we call you, and the third one is he or she. So these are names, conventions in the world, how they are known to be. So that way I exist. So therefore, in relation with this name and our 5 aggregates, which is the base, and the name, and with the name comes also the concept. Because that is when we see this glass, because there's not any other reason for this object to be glass, except only reason is how in the world this is called glass. So therefore, through this kind of relation, part and part holder is a relative. So that way the glass exists. So therefore, if somebody takes with this name, then whenever we see this object, we see this is a glass, which is correct. If we see this as something else, as a rabbit or something like that, then is already wrong, because we are contradicting the conventional reality.
this conventional reality. So therefore, if one sees this according to this convention, this name as a glass, that is correct. And it has certain functions to fulfill. If we call this as a rabbit, it is just stupid, because it cannot fulfill the functions of the rabbit. So therefore, if one see it as a glass, that's correct. In the same way, our aggregates on this, then we apply the name I. So, but if I put this I on somebody else, you are I, then it's already a mistake, making a fool of oneself. The other person is, from your point of view, is you. Next one, you are you, and the next one is she. But this I is not absolute, because if this I is absolute, then it should be I all the time I. But it's only I is only relative. It's a point of view. From my point of view, this I is I. But from your point of view, this I is never I, it's you. And from the other's point of view, is a he, or certain names, or just a person. But from one's own point of view, I am I. And not only that, but I'm very important, the most important thing in the world. So all these things are projection, does not correspond to the reality. So first we create an inherent I, which is non-existent, is an imagination, and then we apply so many attributes to it which is not at all suitable. We can see it as something very precious, this I is, so this I is the owner of all my things that belong to me, is like the possessor to which all the possessions belong to. And also this I, then we see it something most important, almost like center of the universe, and that we call this kind of belief in this kind of inherent I or independent I, which is fundamental ignorance. In Sanskrit, avidya, that means ignorance. This is the fundamental mistake. And on that, when we have that, then there comes also many other delusions, what is called. First of all comes egoism, which is not only we believe in such a self, but we believe that self as the most precious, more precious than other sentient beings. I am much more important than the other sentient beings. My suffering is more important than others' suffering. My happiness is more important than others' happiness. And that way, from that point of view, taking that I as the center, and then when we look at all other beings around us, we categorize them also in different parts. Some are our friends, other beings are our enemies, a whole lot of other beings are indifferent ones. For the first group we have attachment, to the second group we have hatred, for the third group total negligence, because the first group is close to this I. So therefore, they are special. And the second group is somewhat harmful to this I, or a danger for this I. Therefore, it's something undesirable, wish. And for the third group, which seem to have nothing to do with this I, then we can just simply ignore. So like this, from this first false projection of the I, false I, and then we grasp it to be true, and then we cherish it, and that is the egoism. And from egoism comes all the rest, attachment, hatred, anger, jealousy, the whole series of delusions. And therefore, then we go through also a whole lot of problems and sufferings and all that, So therefore, at the root of that is that false view of the self. And the reason why this is wrong is because there is no such any inherent independent I. If you look in, where does one find? There's nothing. You can look through the body to the feet. You find a whole lot of things, parts, up to the smallest particle. You find countless things, but you don't find any I. The owner is not there. If we look through our mind also, mind is a very complex phenomenon. It has lots of primary consciousness, secondary consciousness, and sense consciousness, mental consciousness. In Buddhism, the whole mind and mental factors is a very important subject. Buddhist psychology is very, very, very subtle and very, very vast. One classifies the mind in terms of their perceptions, like sensory consciousness and mental consciousness. In terms of their levels, one talks about gross consciousness, subtlest consciousness. In terms of their nature, one classified them into wholesome mind, unwholesome mind, neutral mind, etc. So there are many ways of classifying the subject mind or consciousness, but there are a whole lot of things. But if we look through, where is this I? In all these mind, none of them is also mind. So in the body there is no such a self, in the mind also there is no self. So does that mean that I don't exist at all? To think like that is again mistake. Of course there exists I. Because of our existence we are analyzing, we are capable to, and if there is no person at all, then how can one analyze? So therefore to think I am non-existent, this is a very nihilistic view, which is very incorrect.
Nothing changes. Fucking Nazis.
They were Nazis, dude?
Oh, come on, Donnie. They were threatening castration.
Uh-huh.
Are we going to split hairs here?
No.
Am I wrong?
Well, he
Man, they were nihilists, man.
Huh?
They kept saying they believe in nothing.
Nihilists. Fuck me. I mean, say what you want about the tenets of National Socialism, dude. At least it's an ethos.
Yeah.
So, of course, we do exist, but it does not exist in the way we think, we believe to be existing, in that inherent way. Then how do we exist? Then, as Buddha has pointed out very clearly, Buddha said, all phenomena are, not only I, but every phenomena are patitya samutpada. That means interdependently existing. They are existing in dependence, dependence on paths, dependence on cause and conditions, and dependence on the name, on the concept, and through dependence upon all these different factors, there exists a phenomena. There is you, there is me, there is me, and there are other beings, there are sufferings, there are happiness, and there are all these kind of things. All depend completely on their various factors. Therefore, they are also changeable, because all the changes take place because of the dependence upon cause and conditions. So therefore, suffering may not exist all the time. There is suffering due to cause and conditions. But these cause and conditions change, then suffering can change. One also can be liberated from suffering. Happiness can also change. A person can change. Everything can change, because we are not independently existing, but we are all dependently existing, depending upon other things. So inherently, is there any inherently existing phenomenon? There's not. Buddhas also don't exist inherently. We do not exist inherently. Anything do not exist inherently. Everything is conventional. That means everything depends upon their names. Buddha is also a name. But if the question is what observes, what observes, then one should say it is the mind.
The mind.
It is the subject mind, because it is the mind's role. Each phenomena has its functions. The functions of mind or consciousness, in Buddhism is same. Consciousness and mind is same. The consciousness is classified in six. 5 sense consciousnesses, and then is the mental consciousness. So it is the mental consciousness which usually knows, identifies, and analyzes, having the intention to do this and that. It's all mental. 6th consciousness, the mind, what is called. So that is what actually observes, that also knows the objects. So therefore one should say that is the subject, subject which,
yes.
But the subject also do not exist independently. Subject exists independent of the object.
Yes.
So if there is no object, there is no subject at all, because in Buddhism the objects are that which is known, and the subject, the mind, consciousness, they are, or even a person can be called also a subject, and is the one which knows. And the object is that which is knowable, or that which is known. So therefore, without knowing, without knower, there is no knowable object. Without knowable object, there is also no knower. So the subject, and object are interdependent also. The consciousness or the mind is the knower of the person's also existence of a person. Yeah.
Without my consciousness, the world does not exist. So if I'm not conscious of the studio, of you, this means, for example, if now I am in deep sleep with no dreams, is it as if you are not existing?
It is not also exactly like that, because even though one's own consciousness is asleep or is not working or whatever, however, they are the consciousness of all other sentient beings. If there is an object is always unknowable, that which is knowable, that is known. That does not mean that all should be known by me. Whoever knows it, even though I don't exist at all, let's say we don't, I am not in this whole play at all, but still there are other sentient beings, with consciousnesses who sees, then that is sufficient for the existence of a phenomena.
So it is objective out there world exists independently of the consciousness? Of my consciousness. But
No, of course, and my consciousness, yes. That's, there are, a lot of phenomena, for example, in another world system, which I have no knowledge of. I've never seen, or maybe never see. But still there are many other phenomena which exist beyond our capacity of knowing, beyond our knowledge, at the present. Many things which are not at all possible for me to know now, maybe will become evident some other time. Because our mind is not always in the same state. Our mind can infinitely develop a capacity of knowing and all that. Our mind at the present is very weak, very limited. Actually, not such a powerful mind we have, but it is possible that we increase the power of our mind.
To expand the consciousness level.
Expand the consciousness, capacity of knowing. We classify all phenomena into three groups, which are called evident phenomena, the hidden phenomena, and the very hidden phenomena. So evident phenomena are that we can be through the senses. We can see, feel, touch, smell, etc. There's a whole range of that even an ordinary person can perceive them quite directly. That's one type of phenomena, but that's not everything. There exists a whole lot of other phenomena which is beyond the reach of our sense perceptions and so forth. So therefore, another range of phenomena, that is hidden phenomena. That means that cannot be touched or felt, but one can still understand them through inference, through logical inference, existence of something not directly seen, but one can understand it through logical inference, through the perfect reasonings on the basis of, there are a lot of things like that. And that's second group.
Yes, and
but the third group is even, it goes beyond our logic, some things which requires the mind itself to be, its power has to be increased. Just like, just like a lens,
Yes.
that certain very minute, such subtle things, objects, you don't see with your eyes, you don't see it also with your glasses. You need very powerful lenses.
Microscope.
In microscope, and which, for example, there are lots of things which don't we see. For example, even these kind of
a virus, for example.
There's a lot of virus, and in all our carpets, and there are lots of these
microorganisms.
Yes, microorganisms, these mildews and so on. These things. We don't see anything, but through the microscope, then we see they have legs and everything. They are, quite an animal there. So that needs our, that needs the power of the lens to be increased. But this is still physical. It still belongs to the first category. But similar to that, our mental power can also know quite a lot of things through inference or through whatsoever. depending upon the intelligence. But a lot of things beyond that, that still in which we have to increase the power of our mind, and this is very possible. Buddha has taught all the systematic methods through meditations to increase the power of our memory, to the power of our concentration, and the power of our discernment or wisdom. And all these mental faculties which we have now are in a kind of potential state. But it can be increased, and through increasing those parts of the mind, it is possible to know lots of things, which are beyond our perception now, to know directly.
Venerable Master Gonsaltul Rinpoche.
Hey there, three people watching. The one thing about the Heart Sutra, where it states form as emptiness, emptiness as form, the one thing that is continuously neglected, and I would even say dangerously neglected, is the second part of that statement, which is form as emptiness, emptiness as form. That's right. Emptiness as form is what I was looking for. That's the second part. I almost kind of lost it, but then I recited it to myself and discovered what it is. Emptiness as form is as valid as form as emptiness. It might as well have begun emptiness as form, form as emptiness. It would have just been just as valid. The idea of emptiness is meant to inhabit a place between eternalism and nihilism, at least according to the Madhyamaka school, but I'm just gonna... Okay, the idea of emptiness is meant to live in a space between eternalism and nihilism.
We believe in nothing. We believe in nothing, Labolsky, nothing. And tomorrow we come back and we cut off your Johnson.
Excuse me?
I said we cut off your Johnson!
Nihilism is wrong. Emptiness is the nature of existence. It's the essenceless, that's right, essenceless way that everything exists. Like, it's the mother of existence. It is at the core of the existence. And without this existence, emptiness, as it is here defined, would have no meaning. So it defines how things exist, not that they don't exist. There doesn't need to be a very kind of a paradoxical or interesting statement in the sutra to say that nothing exists. Like, if that's what they wanted to say in that sutra, the Bodhisattvas, they would have just said it.
Why is the Buddha in the Heart Sutra drawing such an equivalence between, almost like an identity relation between form and emptiness? So form is here only an example because you have form aggregates and feelings and so on. The reason that is because it is not so much emptiness that we grasp at, but rather it's the reality of everyday things that we encounter within our life, whether it is the objects around us or whether it is our own experience of pain and pleasure or thoughts and feelings that we constantly live in our day-to-day life. These are the things that we engage with in our everyday life, and these are the things that either chain us to a particular strict kind of constrained way of looking at things, and then give rise to negative emotions and so on, and perpetuate the cycle of habits and patterns and so on. By pointing out that form is emptiness, the Heart Sutra is radically reminding us that the objects of everyday life that we relate to, which seem so real, so tangible and so solid and concrete, but in fact, if you reflect deeply, the kind of concreteness and solidity that we have imposed on them is more of a construct. The reality of these phenomena is that they are thoroughly dependent, they are thoroughly contingent, and even our concepts of, say, a flower already presupposes many other concepts that are part of it. But in our naive way of relating to the world, we tend to look at it as if these are independent silos or discrete things that somehow, like billiard balls hitting each other, we grasp onto them, we impose upon them a reality that is way beyond what they possess. And pointing out this through the teaching on emptiness, the idea is to, teach us how to have a less grasping. But then the danger is that with human mind, anything that we find beneficial, we find useful and helpful and true, then our tendency is to immediately grasp onto that one.
Yes.
So now if form is emptiness, then emptiness must be true and real and absolute. Then we have a tendency to grasp onto that. And then there, basically saying emptiness is form, the Buddha is pointing out, although that is the ultimate truth of things, but that ultimate truth is only true in relation to the everyday objects.
Yes.
So it's not something that is like standing outside, independent, transcendent. So then again, the relationship is drawn back. So that, and then in the Heart Sutra, the text goes on to say, there is no, form other than emptiness, and there is no emptiness other than form. So it's really, then that identity relation is even being drawn stronger, so that no room is left where there is even a tiniest possibility of grasping either onto the everyday world of objects or to the emptiness of their things. And that's a way of, in some sense, it's like using emptiness as a medicine to cure our grasping at form, but then using another medicine to cure the potential of grasping at emptiness itself, so that the medicine does not turn into poison. And so that's why there's this constant, kind of play between form and emptiness and form.
So let me give you another example related to vaping, which is, of course, the way you introduce philosophical topics in Buddhism. So right now I'm enjoying this wild berry e-liquid Leah made. I keep discovering, I discovered the name of this vaping device, and now I discovered that it's like wild berry Leah made, not even lemonade. I don't know what this means. Well, anyway, they're appealing to wild berry flavor. Now, this thing has no relations to wild berry, right? It's just a bunch of chemicals combined with nicotine that they have designated as wild berry, right? So it's just an abstract designation because they have an understanding that we can't handle emptiness. No, that we can't handle some unidentified flavor that I could have taken this flavor and I would never have guessed that it is wild berry, right? So this whole thing is kind of, the title of it, the designation, is empty of inherent existence, right? And then I have some candies here somewhere. God damn it. All right, there we go. So these are also airheads. Candies, and they have the designations for these candies also. So there is a cherry, there is blue raspberry, there is orange, there is watermelon, and then there is white mystery. A white mystery candy, hopefully unrelated to Jeffrey Epstein. And original fruit, they say, right? So this also has no relation to fruit. This has no relation to fruit. They're just different tastes designated with fruits. And then there are actual fruits that taste nothing like them. And then there's somebody like myself who consumes more of things that are designated as fruits that aren't. So the taste of fruits has no inherent existence. This has no real connection with fruits aside from designation and some sort of a taste that could be processed as fruit, but really would remind you nothing of eating actual berries. And yet they're all interdependent, and you couldn't have one without the other. Like you couldn't have an abstract idea of fruits without actual fruits existing. That designation would be meaningless. So that's the beauty of the whole thing. It's sort of like with impermanence. You love a young honey, but of course she can't be too young, or that's illegal, you would be a pedophile, Dad. What's wrong with you? So you kind of depend on these kind of characteristics of somebody who completed puberty. But then we get very salty when down the road things change, maybe like she found somebody else. We expect things out of impermanence, we expect change, and we count on it when we need it. Waiting for somebody to pass puberty might not have been a good example, but like, let's say like graduating from college or something like that. Like, we depend on that, but then we also regret it and fight against it. So strangely enough, we still, depending on impermanence, we still look for that permanent happy career or a permanent state of mind in a happy relationship after this period of impermanence of going to college is completed, where we count on impermanence. So these are the kinds of delusions that we live with in regards to things. Like I said before, a permanent Ivan reaches for another permanent thing to achieve happiness. It's like two very overweight people laying around in a bed with their baby, and they roll around and they kind of suffocate the baby. And the baby in this instance is awareness. It's the thing behind this abstract idea of self that actually experiences nothing. I don't experience anything as a Russian-American, pseudo-Russian, pseudo-American, pseudo-Tibetan Buddhist, which is what I am. I experience nothing from that perspective. I only experience things relative to my awareness and the reflexes that are connected to that awareness. Habitual reflexes. In one of these reflexes, it's like if somebody disrespects me at work or something, like they say, fuck you. That never happened, but, first I experience it as a reflex, like it's hurtful to me as a reflex of my awareness. However, then I kind of summon up Ivan, the phantom self, the phantom aggregate of different characteristics that are constantly changing and change themselves in meaning. Like sometimes I emphasize the Russian, sometimes American, well, kind of rarely American, but sometimes Buddhist. Like this kind of a juggling act, I recall it, I kind of summoned this magical phantom of some permanent self, and then I fucking slap that fuck you in my face and kind of reflect on it from that idea, even though the actual entity that experienced the fuck you is not all these designations that even the person who told me to go fuck myself, which never actually happened, it's just hypothetical. They couldn't possibly know about these fucking dumb designations. But they could give a shit if I'm like some sort of a Tibetan Buddhism, whatever, fucking pseudo-Buddhist. That's not who they insulted. They insulted their own sort of a designation. And now I'm going to relate to it from the point of view of self, and I'm going to operate from the point of view of self, of some permanent self. And it's just an automatic thing that we do. And this is what these teachings and these perspectives are meant to undermine.
Okay. There is no question. Do you still have some sort of question? No. Then we can.
All I was saying is that whatever Dr. Ekman is trying to achieve, distal compassion, this kind of teaching of understanding emptiness has helped me for distal compassion too. But you and I can talk about it. Yes.
Yes, this is the intellectual side. This immense help. And then also you see this concept. Actually, this is a concept, emptiness. It's actual meaning is interdependency. Dependent and arising. So actually interdependency. You see, that give us the sort of, the conviction. Everything can change.
Yes.
And everything exists not independently or absolutely, but due to other factors. So two good things here. Now I'm propagating Buddha Dharma. I never was propagating Buddha Dharma. But since here, it's just this way. So the practice of altruism, the method side, this wisdom, understanding of anathema, the self-grasping reduce. And that very meaning of emptiness is absence of independent existence. So things exist due to other factors. That idea widen our perception to look. Some good event or bad event happen. We immediately look, oh, due to this happened. Due to this happened. So our negative emotion, you see my friend, scientist, they say when we develop anger, we need some kind of absolute target. With help of these, or because of understanding, things does not exist by independently, but due to other factor, then you lost the independent target. Now, for example, some of the Chinese, you see a lot of sort of atrocities. If you look, or due to many other factors, then the anger or frustration towards that person, that particular sort of group of people or individual, we can't blame because of the whole circumstances, because of the many other factors, including our own sort of. Now here, we also believe, we also, you see, helpful, you see, thinking about negative action or destructive action which we committed in previous life. So that also is helpful to reduce, you see, our frustrations or angers like that. Whether true or not, psychologically very helpful.
It's not that you are literally empty.
So here you can say, Ivan, you insufferable Dharma douche. Okay, so the vaping device, it is made up of different parts. Without different parts, it doesn't work. However, doesn't it have an intrinsic capacity to vape in a way that these headphones don't? That is to say, isn't it defined? If its essence is not in its actual kind of physical attributes or in its material presence, that then its essence then is in its function, in its ability to vape. Hold your horses, dude, and let me tell you a joke. So the joke is this. In the Soviet Union, the son asks his father, wasn't there a cult of personality around Leonid Brezhnev? Brezhnev just died at that point, and that's what his son asked. And so the father replies, a cult of personality? Of course. But what a personality. How's that joke? Any effect? Any sense of merriment arising in you? The joke is contingent on a certain mutual recognition of reality, on a connection of dots with pre-existing reference points. So the reason why in all likelihood you didn't find the first joke funny is because you might have not been aware of its context. And the context would be this. After Stalin died, Nikita Khrushchev, his successor, condemned his cult of personality. This was their central criticism of Stalin, is the cult of personality. Cult of personality was a bad thing, and it polluted the essence of the Soviet Union as perceived by Khrushchev, which was Marxism-Leninism. So Stalinist cult of personality was a deviation that he condemned during the famous Party Congress. So then Khrushchev was replaced, and then we had Leonid Brezhnev. Now Leonid Brezhnev, as he was getting older and older, more and more senile, he was celebrated more and more by the party officials because they were all connected to this regime that was predictable and where there was like comfortable corruption and easy promotion. And so they were really holding on to this dying Brezhnev. And so with all these contingent parts, when the father says, yes, but what a personality, you have to have a reference point at least to Brezhnev's personality. And since you didn't, the joke wasn't funny. So for the joke to be funny, the cause has to exist in the effect. That is to say, the cause for the laughter, by definition, has to exist within you. And for the cause to be valid, for me to succeed with this joke, for it to actually be a joke, the effect has to be connected with the cause. It has to live. It has to live in the cause. Aside from that, the joke has no essence without that relationship. It just has the essence of just a strange statement. It's empty of its inherent existence of being a joke. So even though it is defined by that function, when you say a joke, you would define it as a statement that makes people laugh based on a mutual recognition of reality. If the cause and effect aren't interconnected, then it cannot possibly be solely defined by that function.
If you analyze more deeper way, not only result depend on its own causes, but anything which become cause entirely depend its own result. Without result, you never be cause. So the very factor itself become cause depend on result. So these differences. Result come from cause. Here, cause must be first, then result. But the existence of cause depend on its own result. Actually, result come later. Cause come first, but it become cause. It depend on the future result. 자자가 대부 줄을 때네 끼 신스기하래. 다 주 대부를 때네 끼스 말해. 이나야 주의 뭐 줘야 돼 대부를 때려.
When we say a result is dependent upon the cause, we also mean to say that the result has arisen from the cause. But when we say that the cause is dependent upon the result, it doesn't mean that the cause is actually born from the result. But to establish something as the cause, it has to do in relation with the result. So a result that is yet to arise, based on that result, only then can we term something as cause, without which, without considering the involvement of the result, we cannot call something as cause. So based on that, even though it's not arising from the result, it's still dependent upon the result.
So that shows interdependency. Cause not come from a result, but the very nature of cause depend on the result, coming result. So now that brings the argument, everything's existence depend on other, not by itself.
So let's take something like poison. The body has to have a capacity. So for something to be classified as a poison, it has to be connected with something that will kill itself or self-destruct in relation to it. Poison doesn't exist in some vacuum, right? So it's like saying, is radiation inherently lethal? Well, it's as lethal as me doing this. So this kind of emotion is enough for me to kill a lot of insects. Like I could just have a party. Radiation also has to exist at a specific amount. It then affects people differently. And it is in any way very stupid to reduce a whole phenomenon of radiation to its effect on certain mammals. It's not intrinsically lethal because many microorganisms would do just fine with like under high doses of radiation. So it's not intrinsically lethal, but it does have that function. It also would be dumb to say that it's non-lethal, which brings us back to the two truths, a relative truth and the ultimate truth. The ultimate truth is that nothing has an inherent essence. However, the relative truth is that in relativity to something, solely defined by the relationship, where the effect has within it the cause, and the cause is completely defined by the effect, in that instance, in that relationship, I wouldn't want to be in some place with a high level of radiation. So in this sense, this vaping device is not only free of essential existence on account of the matter that composes it, it's also free of inherent existence in relations to its function. I mean, the ultimate vaping device, its complete essence, is of course to attract honeys. It's a lady killer, this thing. But then there are these like 10% of women who are kind of like these microorganisms who survive radiation, who just don't find vaping attractive.
This bad boy is a dual 18650 mod. The Aegis 1 was not. And this bad boy's got 100 more watts than the Aegis 1. Also, this kit comes with a tank called the Aero Tank, and it's got a mesh core head. But it's not about the tank, guys. The tank, it's okay. We'll get into that. It's about the mod, though. This mod hits like a truck full of dildos. There is no ramp up. Hear this. None. Like I said, love, love, love where the fire button is positioned. Yeah, the airflow's loud too, but boy, she chucking tits. Flavor's good, man. It's above average. Like I said, B.
Everything has a relationship, continuous relationships, of like a bunch of bubbles that like children blow, like soap bubbles that are clustered together. When we look at something like that, we see the interdependence and we see the impermanence. But when things have a longer lifespan, in a sense, those things are not apparent. And that function of bubbles, that nature, empty nature of bubbles, applies as much as to the heavy material components as it does to its functions. Both the functions and the components exist in a consistent state of interdependence.
So in the phenomena, it's two aspects.
So based on the appearance to the mind, there are two ways of establishing phenomena. One is the established phenomena, and the other one as the negative phenomena.
Now here, absence of elephant exists, because we can understand no elephant here. So non-existence of elephant exists here. But that understanding entirely depends on some knowledge about elephant. The negation.
No, negation.
So the absence of elephant, that phenomena, in order to understand that,
to understand one aspect of the phenomena, it can only take place when we establish the existence of the phenomena by negating something.
Now within negation, two types. For example, no elephant but. Then there's also negation, but some hint, there's some other. No elephant, but. Although no elephant, then elephant cover.
So even though the existence of the elephant is negated, implicitly it implies that something else exists than the existence of the elephant. So by negating something, it actually gives rise to an implicative understanding of the existence of something else.
So now negation. Therefore, within negation, two types. One, absolute negation.
Non-affirming negative. And one is affirming. Something else is affirmed. So it's like an implicative negative, where by negating something, you still get to understand the existence of something else. And
now shunyata is just nothing. Nothing sort of absolute, so negation.
Yeah. So non-affirming negative. So where you do not postulate the existence of something by negating. You just negate, and there isn't any postulation of the existence of something else.
So when mind concentrate through analytical sort of meditation, finally you find nothingness. That does not mean nothing at all.
Complete absence.
Relatively, things exist due to other factor, not independently. Independent existence, when you investigate, nothing.
Every moment of your awareness is connected with prior moments of awareness. Not directly with that moment, but indirectly through a chain of other moments of awareness. There is no other way for you to exist. There's literally no other way. And what you're watching right now is going to be connected with the remainder of your life. Not directly, it's not going to have a defining feature. What you came in with when you started watching this, and what you're going to come up with, is a longer trajectory of your life. So everything in my dumb life is interconnected with you directly through these things, or from Hitler being our dad, or through a variety of other ways. In many ways, what I'm saying right now and the whole idea of emptiness is kind of common sense. But it's not exactly common sense if you look at it from a point of view of history. It's only common sense because it directly parallels the insights of science, even though all of this stuff came from another direction, came from the study and understanding of awareness, not a preoccupation with a material world in isolation. So that part is kind of interesting. And things like atoms and the universe itself seems so permanent. Our Earth seems so permanent. There were so many kind of permanent things, and now they're gone. Whereas the Buddhists always accepted the notion that our universe has emerged from another universe, and that nothing, literally nothing, has ever been permanent.
What comes next? So what? Full of questions, possibilities of all kinds. But then again, that doesn't mean anything at all. That moment where you catch yourself between that and this, and begin to realize that who you are is not particularly certain on the spot. You begin to catch yourself between the 2 points, which is not really a 2 point, it's a 1 point, which is splintered already in 2 points. And you begin to realize there's this or that possibilities of it, and on the other hand, it might be so, but so what? And time to find out. And let us have a good time with that, whatever it is. And all those little speculations take place in our head, in our mind. And at the same time, the whole thing is total bullshit, which is the Buddhist calls nothing. Absence of bullshit. And translate that in the more traditional word, that absence of bullshit, absence of a conceptualized mind, conceptualizing to the situations, conceptualizing to try to prove whether you exist or the others exist, and conceptualizing whether you exist, the others exist, therefore we could create some sense of a mutual game, joke. And that is the heavy load, or what is precisely known as spiritual materialism. Spiritual materialism, which is absence in the notion of shunyata situation, absence of those particular kind of trips that we try to hang on to, and we try to survive from those particular process, and by surviving we could generate further games and greater games of all kinds, and we will feel great, somewhat temporary and great and fantastic, and eventually feel very grave. And we begin to catch up with our own trips, our own materialism, and our own problems of all kinds, and things are not particularly super anymore. And these things begin to catch up with us, which is called a depression. And then at that point we begin to complain the government or the organization, our parents, our schooling systems, and our welfare systems, everything you can handle. We begin to make a gigantic complaint about the whole thing. And we are known as the protesters, underground, or whatever, leftist or the rightist or whatever you have, blah, blah, blah. Actually, at that point, if you understand the whole thing, you could create ideal society which is not so ideal, but is right society. At that point, you could put down all the trips and just be vacant and open. And the vacant and open, as I said already, does not necessarily mean to say no money in the wallet approach of emptiness, shunyata, but simply clear, fantastic space and such freshness can take place. It's beautiful. It's real. It has been real for 2,500 years in the past, and it is still real. And we better take that reality. Old-aged real, still up-to-date real, and the Shunyata principle is very real. So no trips, no conceptualized approaches taking place in our system. That's the basic notion of Shunyata, which doesn't mean to say negate everything, that there's no room, there's no house, there's no roof, there's no speaker, there's no audience, there's no carpet, there's no television camera, whatever. Those things are just simple kind of bourgeois Zen joke that has developed in America by a lot of people. And people got killed on those dangerous bourgeois Zen words. And lots of people commit suicide. They think it's safe. Since there's nobody there, therefore why not just give up the whole thing? And a lot of people get creating all kinds of messy job in their universe, their world. Well, however, that's a different topic. We're not up to discussing politics at this point, but it actually comes in.
And so for Buddhists, the ultimate paradox isn't the statement form is emptiness, emptiness is form. The ultimate paradox is that anything that is alive, everything wants happiness on one level or another. Like a spider runs away from you when it detects danger from you. The cat rubs against your feet. It gets something out of it. And so here we are as human beings. We're perfectly aware, or should be aware, that ultimately it is our mind that registers all happiness and unhappiness. And yet we're completely incapable, even with our understanding of cause and effect, to achieve any kind of a lasting contentment. It doesn't happen because when we look at that story, it's easier for us to believe that the Santa Claus is real, that the whole experience was a lie and disappointing pain, even though that's not how we originally experienced it. Or that the whole thing was just sitting on the lap of a pedophile. Well, in a sense, it was all of these things. And all of these things you have experienced as having essence. And yet, by the very fact that you have experienced them in succession as having essence, in and of itself spells out the fact that it has no essence as an experience. And so we search for something tangible out there, something permanent, that of course our mind designates with heaviness. Nothing outside of my mind designates this object with any meaning. I do. So there is the object, and then there is myself, and then there is a holy and sacred relationship with this object that by definition cannot fulfill us.
Those jewels aren't from the dwarf's diamond mine, are they?
I don't think so.
And so this is the interesting thing about Buddhism, and specifically about the Tibetan civilization that really, I believe, preserved it better than others, about this intersection between philosophy and psychology, something seemingly like abstract like emptiness, connected with our every experience. Not that you have to accept this perspective, but nevertheless this is a kind of a philosophical maneuver, is something that is unknown to me in Western philosophy. Like, granted, I completely don't give a shit about it, precisely for its lack of relevance to day-to-day life, even if that's a plebeian critique. In any case, what I've done here with emptiness for as long as I've been rambling about it is just drawn an outline of it. I mean, people have been talking about it for thousands of years now, or at least over 1,000 years, and it gets way more technical than that. And then there are 4 schools of Tibetan Buddhism, and they all have a different take on it. So there you have it. It's an outline. I don't think it was the worst outline of the topic you could have encountered.
So here, existence, non-existence, dependent, independent, direct opposite. Either dependent or independent. No third way. Do you find one third way? Neither dependent
or independent.
Oh.
Is there any other third alternative?
So that mangasati.
So this is dichotomically mutually exclusive. There is another term, dichotomy.
Oh, mange. So dependent and not dependent.
Mutually exclusive.
Neither this nor that. No third. So now, the very nature of the existence, obviously, it depends on many other factors. Those factors are actually not that thing. Right?
So for the object to establish its own nature, it has to also depend upon something which is not the object itself. So to establish the object as itself, it has to again depend on something which is not it.
Some sense?